So I'm going to talk about safety, efficacy, and pharmacological considerations of psychedelic medications today. I don't have any relevant disclosures. Financially, I will be talking about, as given the theme here currently, some of the medications or the psychedelics are Schedule 1 and not FDA approved. I also want to make clear to the audience that I don't represent the FDA. I have never worked for the FDA or been a consultant for the FDA. And I think that becomes ultimately an advantage on my end and your end, because I can speak a little bit more freely on some of these things than and not having to worry about government or FDA looking over my shoulder. I should also say is that a lot of my experience here all comes from the science. I've never personally tried the psychedelics myself. I have had patient encounters with bad experiences on them. But again, mine primarily come from the scientific literature, which I find fairly compelling going forward. As far as covering objectives, I want to talk a little bit about some of the basics of the FDA process, because I think once we look at that, it gives us an idea of where we're going. I know Dr. Lehman, it began laying some foundation here. I'm just going to hopefully not steal any more of his thunder that I already will and do. And then I also want to begin the group's thought process on if there's some special considerations and things, if and hopefully I would prefer to use the word when some of these do get FDA approved. I think speaking for myself and many other people, we would hate to see decades worth of research frozen again or put back into the shelves of history. So I'm not quite sure if Dr. Towen was able to share these slides, but these series of slides are hot off the press, have not been released publicly, but Jim Davis, the state drug epidemiologist, was kind enough to share the preliminary 2021 data with me and gave me permission to share this in some talk. So over the pandemic, we have seen a major increase in overdose deaths in New Mexico. We had been doing we had several programs and things going in the late 2010s and actually fell out of the top 5 states for drug overdose deaths. Unfortunately, we're back on the top 5 list with 2021. And while these are preliminary slides, there's few autopsies that are pending. If there are any changes that we'll be adding cases, but they won't be a lot of cases. Looking at what was the breakdown of these, I was trying to move something. This is primarily related to the fentanyl analogs and methamphetamine. I'm going to come back to the fentanyl just because I think the methamphetamine really needs to be stressed. Looking at a 53% rise and is pretty alarming for any drug at any time. What I can tell you is from 2012 or 2020 that we've seen at least 5, if not 6 times fold increase in methamphetamine deaths. The reason why I want to focus on this one is because my treatment options, as some of what Dr. Lehman was suggesting, the best pharmacologic therapy that we have has a retention rate into treatment of about 10%. And that costs about $1,500 a month to maintain somebody on that. The best therapeutic modality that we have is contingency management, which is basically is based on the B.F. Skinner model, providing rewards. But at the federal level, Medicare, there are limitations on physicians being able to bill for contingency management because of the way that it operates. So again, I think we need some pharmacologic intervention. We need therapeutic intervention to really help with the methamphetamines. Going back to the fentanyl, and I chose this one second because, again, we're seeing the fentanyl epidemic. It's in the news, and we know that. I think a big part of it is New Mexico traditionally has lagged behind the rest of the country as far as new changing of drugs. Once the cartels really got into fentanyl, it's taken off. Currently, it's really, really hard, and I haven't found a patient in well over a year who's been able to find just straight up heroin on the streets anymore. It all contains fentanyl now, and so I think we're getting caught up with the rest of the country and having skyrocketing problems. And so additional treatment modalities are together. My experience has also been with Dr. Towen, with Dr. Lehman, the comorbidity, PTSD, intimate partner violence, so many other crimes are related here. And if we can just start at the fundamental root and treating the addiction or the substance use disorder, that's going to be huge. So here I'm going to, I'm not a fan of PowerPoint slides, if you've heard me. So, and I like pictures. So I just want to talk a little bit about FDA. So FDA has had a variety of roles over 150 plus years of existence. And it really, to me and to my classic teaching, came about in the 1930s with Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, in giving them, and then an additional act of Congress giving them authority to really set regulatory tones and changes. In that time, I think there's some history of the world that comes into play, and the US is really coming to power and being dominant, for better or worse, and everything. But I really think in that we've seen the FDA come to power, and really when they approve, disprove, set dosing guidelines and review that effectively becomes the gold standard around the world. Some will argue that the FDA is too slow. Others will argue that the FDA is too fast. But I think when you've got 100+ years of history and of existence, you're going to make some mistakes. Speaking for myself, I have a hard time getting through the day without a mistake. And so they're going to, but they've had some huge wins too in going a little bit slow. I think probably the biggest win is something in the US we're all familiar with, is the birth defects from thalidomide. And interestingly enough, there was never a single case of thalidomide prescribed in the United States because the FDA was purposely watching the European data to emerge and never approved the drug until many, many years later, at which point it was very clearly caught. And so we know that this is going to come out. Also, I think when it comes to something like approving the psychedelics in general, and I'm going to go into a little bit more of the chemistry and pharmacology here with it, I think we've got to appreciate that this is a difficult role of the FDA, because how is this going to be rolled out? And knowing that we're going to set a gold standard for years, realistically decades to come. And we in the United States also, I think, realize how slow sometimes the FDA is to update those package inserts and the data that goes into it. So I appreciate and respect the decision by FDA. Now, the way this works from a scheduling standpoint is that FDA will say that there is medical value to, say, MDMA, say psilocybin, say ketamine, and once that Schedule 1 drug is said to have medical benefit, then it goes to DEA and Diversion of Drug Control, at which point they are most likely to recognize the medical benefit and change it to my guess is a Schedule 2 drug. So I think one of the challenges that the FDA is really going to struggle with is translating clinical trials into real world experiences. And there are going to be unintended consequences. I don't pretend to say that I've got solutions here, but I want to be part of the discussion. And I hate to see something go awry and we have almost another 20-30 year moratorium on future studies. But I think a lot of the unintended consequences are going to come from money. And I also appreciating that there's going to be a lot of there may be off-labeling use. Once it's approved, it's there. And we see off-label use happen, especially in the realm of psychiatry, fairly frequently. And while there's evidence for it, it's up to the individual practitioner. and you hate to have a few bad apples spoil the bunch, giving a Halloween metaphor again and timing of things. Um, and so I worry about that. I worry that as far as on the financial side, a lot of these studies have involved two therapists who are trained in psychedelics and who understand and know how to do this in the room for 8 hours. How do we get insurances to cover some of that? Becomes a bit of a challenge. Do we really need two therapists and things? These are all questions that have yet to be worked out, and the FDA is going to be struggling with questions like this as well. My Here's putting just my pictures with it, and Dr. Fatimi and I have also discussed this. We want to be on the picture on the left of legitimate doing the therapy. Having never led one of these sessions, I want to take the time. I want to learn. I understand and have seen with my own eyes bad experiences, and I really want to make sure that my patients benefit by it, and that intimate link with trauma doesn't get worse. I also know that as my slow approach here, that somebody's going to be really trying to dial this down and expedite this and try to do one therapist, or see somebody with telehealth and remote with it, and do two people at once, and the financial costs are big. On the other side of the financial thing is, taking psilocybin or psilocin, or muscarine, which are naturally derived, and it's not illegal to give an herb or some of these compounds, and so how is the pharmaceutical company going to recoup their costs? Is a question. In the case of MDMA, is MDMA, or methylene dioxymethamphetamine, was developed over 100 years ago, and nobody can patent it. It's currently costing about $1 billion with a B to bring a new drug to market, and that includes some of the failures, sure, but that's according to JAMA here within the last couple of years. So we're going to, I anticipate, some lower availability and some challenges in getting people financially covered. So the next slides I added at Dr. Fatimi's request, and keeping with the Halloween theme, we're going to go to probably the scariest place that I can think of, and that is organic chemistry. You just go with me on this, and what I'm going to do is get into some structure function activity here. So what these come down to is a basic molecule of phenethylamine, and what the phenethylamine serves, like if we start making substitution, we start making changes on the phenyl group, or that ring compound that goes kind of in a six-membered circle, is we start looking more like the molecule serotonin. If we start making changes on the amine portion, we start looking more like the molecule dopamine. This is really important because dopamine is our feel-good molecule. That's like, you get that rush of winning the lottery, getting big bet that paid off, or some you get a drug rush. Serotonin really helps and establishes our mood. A lot of the psychedelics really hit serotonin really hard, or that's their primary side of action. So just kind of give you an example, and where I'm going with this is I don't expect you to memorize or look at these, but I'm a toxicologist and we like structures. But I want you to appreciate that each of these different drugs, is its own unique compound with its own unique pharmacology. So this is the most basic one, amphetamine, or the street word is speed. Looking at methamphetamine, we've simply added a methyl group onto the amine. Again, methamphetamine is a Schedule II, meaning that myself, Dr. Fatimi, Dr. Towen, and I'm just picking the panelists here, and soon to be Sam, we can legally prescribe it, and a pharmacy will dispense it. This is getting into MDMA. The long name is, just follow me here, and we're going to start this like reading from a book from left to right. So in the left, if you've had some basic chemistry, is a methyl group, and connected to two oxygens, so methylene dioxy, and then methamphetamine having the structure. And again, having a very different chemical difference. If I still haven't convinced you, this is one of my other favorite ones, is pseudoephedrine. You can buy this over the counter as you have to sign your life away. I mean, sign away that you picked it up for the DEA and law enforcement purposes, but it's methamphetamine with an hydroxyl group on the beta carbon, or that OH group. If I hydrolyze that, I go from pseudoephedrine to methamphetamine. Hence the reason why historically, and given nod to our New Mexican roots, why in the first episode of Breaking Bad, they used pseudoephedrine for the starting point. I just wanted to throw in here the compounds psilocybin and Celosin. So a lot of times we talk about magic mushrooms. And to me, it's like, which magic mushroom, which one? And understand there's a whole bunch of different chemicals. And I'm just giving two of psilocybin and Celosin, and these are two separate entities. So when FDA looks at this, they're going to have to make a determination of what's the dose of psilocybin, what's the dose of Celosin. Do we want to have it a mixture? Do we want to have, what other compounds are in or do we want to include, are all things that FDA needs to work out. So this is, I've kind of tried to build up to some of this and some of the other, but we know that prescribing information is going to be an established gold standard immediately when it comes out and serve for several years in the future. I can't predict the future. I'm just trying to live one day at a time, as is a lot of our patients, and trying to really predict what science is going to add to this going forward with the momentum that's already generated, I think is also another challenge. So we also, I think the FDA needs to anticipate off-label use. I also am hoping that FDA and DEA avoid something that we see with like methadone clinics, where we have so much federal oversight of it that over 50 years later, we still have this tremendously heavy oversight that very few clinicians can even prescribe the drug. In the United States, you go to our border north or you go to Europe, and it's very different. This is my second to last slide, but this is to remind us that if FDA approves this, I prefer to use when, is that it's really beginning a phase 4 clinical trials. And that the microscope of all of this is still going to be on, and we're going to be looking at thousands of participants and an application to see that. So my parting thoughts on this is, I think my goal would be the people who need this treatment the most are probably people who don't financially have the resources, and because of their past trauma, because of their past substance use, they're broke. They don't have good insurance. But I think there needs to be some way that we can try to make this more widely available. I think we also need to maintain our high standards that we've had from the clinical trials for safety. And I'm going to tie in continuing future studies together, because I think we can, over time, peel apart and dissect exactly what part of the entire therapeutic experience is most helpful, and what parts are not, and how do we ensure that healing trip, as opposed to that unhealthy, scary trip that worsens a mental health. And I think hopefully in that we can find some ideas. I also think, and my preference or suggestion would be to have the professional organizations at state, but more importantly at the national level, to really establish national guidelines to supplement FDA guidance. And I go this pathway because professional organization, and I'll just use AAAP, is they understand addiction, well established scientifically, and a respected process. And AAAP can also be more flexible in adjusting their guidelines than what FDA can, given the regulation and the oversight of it, and to try to really help curtail the bad apples in the prescribing. and really try to also make it accessible to all.